Here now, we bring you the first ever heart-to-heart with a superhero. Are you nervous?
I don't get nervous. Part of the job description.
Of course.
Excited.
In that case, who are you?
I'm Hal Jordan.
What's good, everybody? I'm Juju Green, aka Straw Hat Goofy, and welcome to Lanterns, the official podcast. Now, some of you may know me as your movie guy, breaking down blockbusters, hunting Easter eggs, talking film to millions of you across TikTok and socials. But for the real day ones, you know I've been deep in comics a lot longer than that. I grew up on Teen Titans, Batman the Animated Series. Justice League Unlimited was my Green Lantern entry point, and John Stewart was my guy. A guy who looks like me, effortlessly cool, but still completely human, even while he's up in space handling those huge cosmic stakes. But the JLU was just the doorway in. I also read the runs. I sat with the lore, tracked with different cores and what each color meant. But Green Lantern Rebirth, that's the one. That's the story that changed how I saw this whole mythology. And it's still one of my favorite comic runs to this day, full stop. I spent years breaking down movies and prestige TV. What makes a story work? What makes a performance land? Now I get to point all of that at a character and a mythology I've loved since I was a kid on a premium DC Studio series that's actually built with the craft to do him justice? Come on. Getting to bring those two worlds together, the analysis side, the lifelong fan side, these are all reasons as to why I said yes to doing this in the first place. And yes, I do know the oath by heart.
When and if to use it, that's the whole ball game, Junior.
Lanterns is a Green Lantern story. Yes, it's about interstellar space cops, but it plays like a murder mystery set in a small Nebraskan town. Honestly, it's exactly what we need for a rebirth of this hero. A place where character and emotion and small moments matter big. It makes the show so interesting to break down. Here's what this podcast is. 3 things. Every week, we go deep on the episode, the choices, the needle drops, the moments you'll want to rewind and debate about. We bring in the people who actually made it so you get behind-the-scenes access and creative context straight from the source. And we zoom out, connecting the show to the big picture and getting into what it's really saying underneath the surface. For our first episode, I've got the 3 people who created this thing. Showrunner, executive producer, co-creator, and writer Chris Mundy. Executive producer, co-creator, and writer Damon Lindelof. And executive producer, co-creator, and writer Tom King. Chris ran Ozark. Damon brought us the Leftovers and Watchmen series. And Tom King, well, he's one of the most acclaimed voices in modern comics. So let's jump into the episode, shall we? We have Chris Mundy, Damon Lindelof, and Tom King with me to talk about the pilot episode of Lanterns. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast, guys.
Thanks so much for having us.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, what an absolute pleasure. Thanks for doing this, man. You're right.
Come on, dude.
This is the first one, too.
This is the very first
we
one.
haven't met before just now.
No.
Yeah, it's exciting.
I'm Tom. Nice to meet you.
Nice
Oh, what a
to meet
pleasure.
you. Hey, I know this guy.
Shate. Like, now, we got to talk about this because, one, incredible first outing with this. I think a lot of people are talking about it right now is Green Lanterns can be dark and gritty and grounded and have a murder mystery in Nebraska. What? It works so well.
Yeah. We'll take credit for being clever every time.
I love this. So first impressions of Green Lantern, my introduction was the Justice League Unlimited show. John Stewart has been my Green Lantern for a long, long time, before I even knew Hal Jordan was even a thing. So this show is going to introduce a lot of people to both of these characters. But I want to know from you guys, what was your first impression of Green Lantern when you first heard about him? When did that start?
The late 70s or early 80s was my first sort of exposure to the DCU. And we had a cartoon called Super Friends.
I remember that.
And the earlier seasons did not include the sort of larger ensemble of Justice League characters, but when they started doing battle with the Legion of Doom, and everybody kind of had corresponding villains,
Yes.
Hal was there and Sinestro was there, and I think that was around the first time that I was like, oh, there's a superhero who kind of uses his imagination. This is a great character for a nerd to aspire to. And then I started buying the comic books as well, and at the time, Hal was a very space-based sort of sci-fi superhero, and all the comics about the Green Lantern Corps and et cetera. So Hal was my gateway lantern for sure.
I like that. Wow.
Super Friends was literally the exact same because it was Saturday morning cartoons, and it's like you got up and you like that was.
Before your parents.
Before your parents.
You're
not
like right there
knowing
with
that
your
they were
breakfast.
so happy not to be having to deal with you. So it was the same. So I came way later to the other stuff, and these guys are much better versed in the world than I am in general. But that was my baseline knowledge from my childhood.
For a lot of us, it starts with TV. But Tom, this is why I asked the question.
Oh.
Where did it start with you, my friend?
Oh, I'm a nerd.
He created Green Lantern.
Tom King, legendary comic writer, by the way, sitting here with us.
Do you know why it's called Green Lantern? Do you know why the lantern is green?
Are we talking with the Alan Scott version? Or
Yeah,
are we talking-
the original why we have a Green Lantern.
Please enlighten me.
Green Lantern was created by a guy named Martin Nodell, a child of immigrants who was desperate to make some money and walked into an office and said, "How can I do anything?" And they said, "We need a superhero." Superman school was in 1940. World War II's like not even started yet. Well, in our country. And he leaves the office and he's like, I got to come up with a literally to make money. Like by tomorrow, I got to come up with a superhero.
Yeah.
And he's in New York and he's walking. I think he lives in Brooklyn. So he's walking to the subway, gets to the subway. At that time, the subway, there was a problem in the subway. He gets there. And at that time, there was a guy, when you get to the subway, there's that, down by the tracks. So you're overlooking it. There's a guy in there, he's waving a red lantern because the track's not safe. There's like a rat down there, there's something broken.
Yeah.
And he's waving a red lantern, and then he's like, okay, it's cleared. And he waves a green lantern. That's a signal that the subway car can come in, that all is clear, that all is good.
Yeah.
And that's when it occurred to him, he's like, Green Lantern means all is good. And that's what green will be. That's the first step in the process.
Huh.
And that's where it comes from, a subway train. Come on in, and the desperation of a guy on the way home from the office being like, I need
to create something.
That's it. That one. That's it. That's a superhero. Green Lantern.
Okay.
Little did he know, we'd like years from then, we'd have him swearing like a fucking trucker. Through the entire thing.
Yeah.
And why there isn't a superhero called the Rat, which is,
So I gotta know, because like we've been waiting, and by we I mean us nerds who like saw the 2011 Green Lantern film with Ryan Reynolds. We've been waiting for kind of like a re-up of this character, a more modern telling. And when we heard about the show, at least when I heard about the show, I said, oh my God, fuck yes, let's do it. It's a buddy cop like type of thing. That's what I want. I expected it to be in space, and I find out that it's grounded. Then I find out John Stewart's a part of it. Everything that came together just seemed amazing. And so I want to know, like, for you guys, how did the origin of this show come to be? Like, exactly what were the steps that it took to get this thing made? Because it's just so different than what I could have expected, and I think it's amazing.
Well, I think Tom was in the door first, so you should probably start. And then we got kind of onboarded subsequently.
Yeah.
But there was some sort of secret cabal of
definitely.
amazing comic brains and movie brains and TV brains that we weren't invited to.
Exactly.
But Tom was.
We purposely didn't invite you.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
We had you on the do not invite list.
I'm a persona non grata.
Yeah.
There should be a biopic about the assembling of you guys, because you're all heavy hitters respectively in shows that you've all worked on. And so when you hear all these names being attached to Green Lantern, it's like, whoa, it's about to be something special. So I got to know the origins of this.
When James Gunn first sort of got the call to do it, he assembled sort of this little writer's room of arcs. It's just incredible people. And we were just, it was the sky's the limit. What can we do? Like how can we make something awesome? How can we make superheroes awesome again? And Green Lanterns came on the table, and I think I threw out something as simple as like we just should do like True Detective Green Lantern, Training Day Green Lantern, like something grounded and real about partners working together. And that was it. It's nothing more than that. That's just like a freaking idea that you just, and it got put on a board, and along with 1,000 other ideas. And at the end of the day, James like, which one do you want to work on? And I'm looking, I was like, I don't know. I saw it just instantly. I saw what it could be if it was done right. If it was a show that was like Ozark, like that literally is in my head. Like I was thinking about those shows. And I was like, yeah, that's the one. Put me on that. That's going to be something special. That's going to be something cool. And I started work on it, and they're like, hey, Tom, what do you think this could be like an HBO show? And I was like, an HBO 9 o'clock superhero show? It's never been done. I mean, but it's been done by David.
9 a.m.
9
just to be
a.m.
clear.
Yeah. No. This is for the morning.
Yeah, exactly.
This is the Saved by the Bell of superhero shows.
Sure.
But don't say that, because people are going to go expecting it to be a Saved by the Bell type of show.
I'd watch that.
He could freeze time. He had a superpower.
Yeah,
Don't forget
exactly.
Zach.
That's right.
He was technically a superhero.
He is a superhero,
Yeah.
low key. Yeah.
The person who's done that better was, and they say, hey, would you work with Damon Lindelof, because we knew each other a little bit through some Watchmen stuff. And of course I said, 100% hell yes, please get Damon in the room. And then we started, and I guess I should probably hand this off like a baton to you because you come into the story.
Yeah, I had a meeting with James. My deal has been at Warner Brothers for basically the last 15 years, and was very excited when James and Peter Safran took over at DC, and they were like, do you want to hang out and we'll tell you what we're up to? And this must have been just a couple of weeks after this room that Tom is describing, because they were like, we've got 20 different projects in various stages, and we're kind of giving me the 2 lines on each one, and the one they were like, and we're doing Green Lanterns, which we're calling Lanterns, as kind of like a cool True Detective noir buddy cop thing with Tom, and I was a huge fan of Tom's comic work, both on Batman and on Vision and Mr. Miracle, and I was like, that one sounds really, really cool. And Jason Momoa came bursting into the room, which is an entirely different story for another time. But that was very exciting. And I was like, cool things are happening here. But I'm sort of post-show running, so a lot of it's going to have to do with who's going to be running the show, because I don't want to take the lead on this, but I want to support the vision of whoever does. And obviously Tom hadn't really done television before, and because it was being described as like True Detective meets kind of DCU superhero storytelling, then I got a call that was like, hey, do you know who Chris Mundy is? And I love Ozark, and he had just done True Detective Night Country, which I hadn't seen yet, but I was hearing incredible things about. And so they were like, what about him? And I was like, yes, please. And then the 3 of us got together, I think in your backyard.
Yeah, and before that, and I was like, I think you got it covered with this. And it's like, just because it says True Detective on the thing doesn't mean you have to literally, like, I just come off helping Issa on that. But I didn't know Damon, but was a huge fan of his work and thought he was incredibly talented. So we went out to breakfast, and it was like, oh, if this is going to be 2 years of my life, I can spend 2 years of my life with him. Like, that was like, it was just like,
okay. Right off the bat.
I was totally wrong. I was so wrong. But it really was that thing of like, oh, okay, I can see the whole. And then, and then we met in my backyard.
You can tell what core ideas haven't changed, and that's like the True Detective of it all. Tom, you mentioned Training Day, which I said that as I was watching it. Was there any other core ideas that you guys like held true to throughout the process, or was there like a lot? Was it just pretty much in flux?
I think the other idea that was embedded in it, and obviously we don't want to spoil anything for what's upcoming, was that it was in the way that I think all great buddy cop movies and shows are, that is not necessarily endemic to Training Day, which is Ethan Hawke and Denzel trying to kill each other. Yeah. Memories. That's what kind of evolves to.
Yeah. They actually really love each other. I felt like deep down.
Yeah. But I think that we were sort of like, we're doing one of those love stories that's kind of more akin to sort of like a Lethal Weapon. And then I think that the love story started to evolve into the movie Ghost. With
I was just about to say, we started talking about
Demi Moore.
Okay.
I think that, you know, obviously you've seen the first episode now, and it might be a little bit disquieting that Hal Jordan is dead. But we're sort of like, I think that the audience is
a
also
little bit
like,
disquieting. You're just describing people, the thousand yells.
I think the audience is probably like, well, you spent a lot of time investing in this guy. We might be seeing him again in future episodes. So we're not, we're not entirely.
We got 7 episodes left. Like, how
he'll show up sometime.
He'll show up sometime.
So yeah, that was the other influence.
Yeah, weirdly we talked about
Unchained Melody.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that, because you come into a show like Lanterns knowing that Hal and John are going to be in this partnership, probably hoping that this is going to be something that we're going to see further in the DCU. But Hal's dead. So that you just get that out the way within the first episode. So talk to me about that decision, because I know that's probably a shocker for everybody watching at home, because that decision was insane.
I didn't think they'd let us do it. So I think it was just an idea. I think it was yours, if I remember right. But I'd be like, oh yeah, that'd be really cool. It's a way to really invest in what that mystery is in a way that was just different. We've got to be digging at something eventually that's meaningful to us. And so when we had that, it was like, oh, that's really cool. They'd never let us, and we floated it, and they're like, great.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, now we've got to write it in a way that is meaningful is respectful of the canon, is respectful of Hal as a character. And again, there's, the good thing about these shows is there's a lot of sci-fi rules that you can break within it. So nothing's ever as clear as you think it is. For those of you watching at home.
Yeah, I think that it started from like this spirit of what can we do that nobody expects. But then when you're talking about story in that way, you can't take a risk just because it's risky, especially when there's an incredible legacy and a canon that you're inheriting and that you are basically a temporary caretaker of. Tom understands this more than Chris and I ever will, but I've had enough experience kind of working in the comic space of going like, you are minding this character for a period of time and then someone else is going to mind it, but you have to acknowledge and pay tribute to everybody who was minding the character before you did. And so, but I think that ultimately we understood that the pilot was presenting a conflict, and the conflict was one ring, two guys, and Hal didn't want to give up the ring, even though he was closer to the end of his career than he should be. And I think that there's a lot kind of in the zeitgeist that we were all feeling about this sort of idea of when is it time to kind of like hand over the institutional power of a position to the next generation, and the idea that Hal didn't want to let go. And I think that if I were watching that on TV, I'd be like, they're going to find a way to compromise, and they're going to make two rings, and they're both going to they're going to be able to share at the end.
It's all happy.
And that felt like very kind of like hokey and frustrating, and not HBO and not even Green Lantern. And so we were like, what if we signaled to the audience that only like that Hal was not going to make it until the end of this season. At least that's what we're presenting here.
Yeah.
When do we want to show that card? It's like, let's just get it. Let's just do it in the pilot. We want people who are leaving the first episode to know exactly what it is they're getting into, versus to get all the way to the finale and then kill Hal. That felt like it was cheap.
The fun thing that I thought about was how many Hal Jordan fans did you piss off by killing him in the first episode?
All of them, including ourselves.
Including me, it's my favorite superhero, right? Oh my God.
Yeah.
He sees so much.
It really is Tom's favorite person. He was sort of the keeper of Hal in
That's
We were like, if we can convince Tom.
But I mean, it does come from the comics. It comes specifically from DC Comics, because I think one of the things that differentiates DC from Marvel is this idea of what Damon just said, which is legacy. The idea of legacy characters, from Batman and Robin, the two Flashes, Wally, and you can't have legacy without loss, right? That's what legacy is. When you're talking to your son, you're not just talking to him for the now, you're talking for the future when you're not there. Gone. Because your legacy is you when I'm not here. And so we're building a show that's about legacy, that's about coaching trees, about passing things on. And so that comes with sort of this threat of death, or this threat of something that could rob you of it, and what lives on you is your training and the time together. So we wanted to bring out those themes which are endemic to me, to DC Comics. And so it comes right from the material. Not to mention Hal famously died for like 20 years in the comics.
No, I was just going to say that. I was like, Emerald Twilight, he became a villain for a long time, and then he dies. And so when you change over these positions and whatnot, that's what made me get used to John Stewart. That's what made me fall in love with him, because he was my Green Lantern. Like, Hal Jordan was just a ghost. Right? So, I feel like...
Or a Spectre, won't even say.
He was a Spectre. He was a freaking Spectre. See, that's season 2. I'm joking. You'll have to put that in season 2. But I believe what you guys did was like, you hit lightning in a bottle. You took something that was mainly for like, cosmology, like, going into the cosmos and making space operas, and then putting it in a small town in Nebraska. So can you talk about kind of like the difficulties of that? Did you guys have any moments where you were thinking, gosh, are people really going to like this? Like, or was this something that you guys just had to...
I mean, besides the one we're in right now. People just watched the first episode.
This is true. This is true.
I think we had faith that if we screwed everything down tight and the logic, we made real characters, it would be interesting. The thing for me, because again, coming less from a comic book space than certainly Tom, but even way less than Damon, it was really important to me to be very respectful of the comics themselves. It was like, as Damon said, we're the keeper of this canon for this minute, and then someone else is going to take it. So I was just like, if we're always aware of that and we're always thinking of it, but thinking of these as real people, we're going to take it seriously, that these are real people and this is their job. We thought we could create a drama that had emotional stakes at least.
Right.
And then if we did that, I'll take our chances and hopefully people will like it.
For me, what I love about this first episode is the balancing of the cosmic with the grounded, right? And so I want to know, did you guys like set like creative rules for how things were going to look, how much of the powers to use? Like, was there like, oh, we can't show this much, let's like hone in on this? How were those conversations?
I think there's an iterative process that you kind of go by feel, but it all really started with what Tom said in that room to James and Peter and those other writers, which is, you know, it's True Detective, it's grounded.
Right.
And I don't like the word grounded because particularly in like, I understand what it means, but I think that when you're telling stories, you kind of want to fly. And I think that the idea that I wouldn't want to write or work on a Green Lantern show where it's like, well, these guys can fly, but they never do. But that basically creates sort of like a creative problem, which is every time they face a problem, you don't want to be going like, why aren't they just using their ring to solve it? And why aren't they just flying from A to B? Why would they ever get in a car and drive anywhere? And so we had to start to talk about and create a construct, no pun intended, whereby
Intended, it was great.
that they were really treating the ring the way that people treat weapons in the real world. And that sort of idea of like, just because a police officer has a gun doesn't mean that they should always draw it. And when they draw it, it doesn't mean that they should always fire it. Because at the end of the day, they are space cops, and we wanted to embrace that. And that's why there's some back and forth between, you know, John and this woman that he meets at the bar. But to acknowledge the world knows that they're space cops, but the idea that they're not walking around in their uniforms, and they're being a little bit more low key. And I think sort of like finding that idea of like, what if they only use these powers when they absolutely and totally had to, and not making that an arbitrary decision, but a very intentional one. I would say we probably spoke more in the room about that. Like, why aren't they? How can this feel like it's really organic? And then there is going to be a time in the show, based on the storyline, where the fact that there are aliens in the greater cosmos and there is outer space that they might need to travel to. But this story is basically taking place in Nebraska, which both these guys have been to and I've never been to. So I defer on the Nebraska front. But like that was the thing we talked about most, not just in the pilot, but all throughout.
Yeah, and it was really, we were finding our way all through the writing of it on that. How much can we hold? It could hold more than we thought at different times. Then once we shot it in the editing room, we kept finding our way. Like as Damon said, it's like you're sort of groping your way to like what the show can hold, what it can be, how it can still feel of this earth, and yet like we'd be idiots to not use everything that Green Lantern can give you.
Yeah, you'd say we found the story through groping. Is that what we want to get out there?
It was very casual, low key, and it just flew by.
Yeah.
It just flew by.
Sure.
Now, Kyle and Aaron. We got Kyle Chandler playing the second iteration of a live-action Hal Jordan, and we got Aaron playing the very first ever live-action iteration of John Stewart. They're phenomenal. Like, off this episode alone, I love their chemistry. I love their contentious nature. I just love how they feel fully formed and fully lived in already. Can you talk to me about the casting of these two actors, and were they always the perfect casting choice for this?
We talked a lot about different things. The big one was finding the age at which we had Hal. It was going to be about replacement. I mean, Kyle was great and looks great. But if he was 45, you'd be like, why is he supposed to retire?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it was like...
He's LeBron. He can still play.
LeBron.
He can still play at least 5 more seasons.
He could go to year 40.
So that was really the tricky thing. Like circling that was the most, I wouldn't say contentious exactly, but the most heated conversations are like...
How old is he?
How old is he? At what point are we finding him? That was the biggie.
Yeah, and we had really short lists, and obviously, I remember very specifically. I had just taken my son to Michigan for a college tour, and Chris called me, and I was standing in the parking lot of a Buffalo Wild Wings, and you were like, "We got Kyle Chandler," and I whooped, and it was very, very exciting.
It was very everything sort of like took off from there. Like it just you could hear the show. You know, I mean, we'd written the pilot, obviously, but like all of a sudden, it just the rhythm of it made sense.
Yeah, And then for John, I think that we were much more excited about the idea of finding someone who's obviously more at the beginning of their career, who hasn't played 15 different roles and sort of like has cut their teeth and is not entirely
By the
inexperienced.
time this comes out, Aaron will have played 15 different roles. He's in everything.
Oh my God, yeah, no, it's crazy.
That's Mufasa.
But Aaron, but
That's
Aaron-
right, yes.
But Aaron had this thing where like the John that we wrote was both a Marine and an architect and an artist. And, you know, Aaron looks like Aaron. You know, I mean, he's like, he's
Best way to
strapping,
put
he's
it.
big,
Superhero.
he's like, yeah,
Literally
you
is a
know.
walking superhero.
You
There's
can
a,
just say gorgeous.
he's like,
I'll say
judgment
it.
here.
The man is
Woo!
gorgeous.
Gorgeous. Yes.
and so, but
He's
he
got
looks
green
like
eyes.
he looks like he's on a Marine
Green
retreat
Lantern.
poster, but there's like a quietness and stillness to Aaron too.
Right.
That like gets the artistic side, and it's like that's a tricky balance, especially among young actors. So that was a real struggle.
And then to your point, I think because we hadn't seen live action John yet.
Yeah.
There were simultaneously like big shoes to fill, but those shoes are not physical shoes yet.
Right,
So in a lot of ways, he's the alpha and the omega. And I think that one of the things that you want an actor who's obviously brilliant at their craft and a great actor, but then the star capability, the idea of someone who can really hold the screen and can carry the weight of a show on their shoulders, especially the pilot being where it ends, the audience is going like, oh wow, this guy, you know, he's going to have to carry it moving forwards. You don't ever want there to be any doubt.
Yeah, we had coffee, Damon and I, with Aaron on the Warner Brothers lot.
Okay.
Remember that? And we walked by
At the Starbucks.
yeah, and we walked by like there's always these tour buses that are going by. And this whole bus, just every single head just watched Aaron walking by. And I don't even know that they knew him. Like the time Rebel Ridge was out, so there might have been
Right.
like, that's the guy from Rebel Ridge, but mostly it was like, who the hell is that?
Who's with the creator of Ozark and Lost?
I was on the tour bus yelling that after.
Yeah, exactly.
I was thinking maybe they all watched him in Old, his mid-sized sedan.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You guys remember that?
I remember
all just
our
inside
table read
sedan.
happened the same weekend he was in the most viral TikTok of all time, where he's just walking down a hallway
Aaron
looking
Pierre,
over
right,
at
yeah.
Mufasa. Yeah,
I still
oh
say
my
that.
God. It was
Yeah,
like
I still say
he's arrived. He was so calm, and I was like, oh my God, like 50 million people just got chills looking at you, and you're just sitting here reading this like incredible.
Hopefully, and I'm gonna say a couple things here. One, I think people aren't gonna forget that he's Mufasa. I think a lot of people will attach him to this role, like to the degree that we attached Tony Stark to Robert Downey Jr., to the degree that we attached Hugh Jackman to Wolverine. I do think that this was made for him, right? And I'm not saying that I can't see anyone else in the role yet. Like, we still have 7 episodes to go. But he is so goddamn pitch perfect here.
100%.
And he is, I see him and I'm like, that is John Stewart. I don't see Aaron Pierre, right? And he, again, you mentioned he has green eyes. Like, what black man has green eyes like that? Like, come on, man.
You need to be cool. Can you be cool, son?
Yes, sir, I can be cool.
Good.
We have 3 writers on this pilot episode. We hear the term too many cooks in the kitchen a lot, but you guys, I feel like, nailed this episode very, very well. How do you divide the work up when it comes to nailing this first, like, outing?
I guess the short answer is that, like, as long as all 3 cooks aren't cooking the same thing and you're communicating at a high level with one another, I think that Tom and I both acknowledge that, you know, that Chris was running the show, and for me that was a tremendous relief, having to be the ultimate decider.
Incredible frustration.
Speak for yourself.
Well, I think that sort of in the Venn diagram of encyclopedia comics knowledge, less comics knowledge, and then kind of coming to it completely and totally fresh, that basically developed a sort of language inherently. But then you just kind of there's a lot of experimentation. And so the 3 of us sitting in a room with whiteboards saying, what about this? What about that? What about this? You need somebody to be the one who says, like, yes, we're going in that direction. And then when it came to the writing, I think that there were just sort of scenes that Chris understood that I inherently had pitched in the room, or that Tom had, and then we all kind of went off into our corners and generated our pages and then started trading pages and exchanging it all. And then it kind of, I think one of the challenges of being a showrunner, whether it's on Lanterns or anything else, is you want every show to feel like it's coming through the same prism,
Yeah.
but at the same time, you want all of the artists, from the writers to the directors to the actors, to sort of like to feel like they can kind of bring their own magic to it. You know, you don't want it all to feel sanded down. And so I think that I feel like when I watch the show, not just the pilot, but the entire thing, I feel proud that I was a part of it and that there's core authorship, but I can also feel all these other people inside of it feeling exactly the same way. And so that's what you're curating for, is vibes.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, Damon's one of the great showrunners. He's on the Mount Rushmore of showrunners in Hollywood.
I don't even know who else is on
I think he just called you old.
Yeah, that's true. I'm right next to Lincoln.
Lincoln was an incredible showrunner.
He was so great.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah.
But from the beginning, Damon's very clear. Like Chris is the author of this work at the end of the day, and so we could argue, but he's the referee. He's the man who's driving it forward. It's his vision, and I think that clarified it. And it was, I don't think of the three of us, we are three large egos, three alpha guys who love story and who love everything. But we knew at the end of the day this is Chris's thing, and then he was going to deliver a beautiful show, which is what he did. So it was having faith in that.
The trust.
I'm a gamma.
You just talk everything out. If you communicate everything, then you're all on the same page.
Yeah.
And then because there was the three of us, and then suddenly Vanessa and Justin and Bree were all there, and the assistants that were on the show were in the room with us and talking about ideas. Like everyone starts owning it, and as long as you're all talking about the same thing, then it's just pieces of everybody are in there.
I love the trust between you three right here. That's why this is what I'm talking about. The titans in your respective places.
I just want to be a teen titan.
I think we all
Middle-aged titans. Is anyone doing that show? Should I pitch that to James and Peter? Middle-aged titans?
As long as it's grounded.
Yeah. Okay, it will be so grounded.
At least one Titan dies in the
We'll
first
just call it
episode.
Titans.
Hold on. What? Was it that or actual comic run just titled Titans? But they're like young adults, right?
sure.
They're just
Yeah, yeah.
Titans.
Right, yeah.
They've tried it a few times. They always become teens again.
They always become teens
Always
again.
are.
So something very interesting about the world of lanterns, right, and very indicative of almost like the world of superheroes in the DCU, is that there are no secret identities, which has always been a staple in comic books and things like that. Like Hal Jordan's taking pictures with fans; they know exactly who he is. They can just run up on him on the street. But talk to me about like the decision to kind of like create a world where these are the type of superheroes that we're meeting that don't hide behind a mask, but they are just exactly who they are.
If we wanted to accept the fact that these are their jobs in the world, and we wanted to walk them around, it was more interesting to us when we first started talking about it that oh yeah, they Carrie says the thing in the stands, look, we know we're not alone. We know all these things. So it's like we could jump mid-story, and part of jumping mid-story is at this point we've evolved to the point where yeah, that's their job, and then they also have to go home after their job. I think it was as simple as that. We wanted to feel like this was a real gig.
Yeah, I think that the idea was that, and obviously I think a large part of this came from that first meeting that James and Peter had with Tom and the other writers, which was that they didn't want to do origin stories. That it was so refreshing for us to not have to service that. But we also understood that it would, in many ways, be an origin story for John. And if we were coming in with John as a kid, sort of at the beginning of his journey and beginning to understand and do the math for how he would want to be Earth's Green Lantern, Hal already had to kind of be established in the universe. And so the idea of maybe the moment that Hal went public would be for a way for us to kill two birds with one stone, which is he's saying, I'm not hiding behind this mask anymore. You kind of have to sort of finesse, even in the original Green Lantern movie, the Ryan Reynolds movie, that sort of idea of you really think this little mask,
I see your cheekbones.
It's sort of going to do the trick. So we're going to just sort of jump past that and say we're now living in a world where he is sort of acknowledging that the secret identity is not something that he needs to have in order to protect himself and his loved ones.
And something that comes right out of the comics, in John Stewart's first appearance, Neil Adams, Denny O'Neil, one of the first things he says to Hal is, I'm not wearing a mask, I'm not hiding my face. I'm proud of who this is, I'm proud of wearing this uniform, and I want people to know I'm the one wearing it. that's the first time you meet John Stewart in the world, and that's the kind of attitude he has. So that came from the comics.
That's really sick.
And to speak to the Hal of it all, I think we're dealing with a Hal that as we go has evolved. Like he's had that superhero part of his life and he's left that behind. And I think that's part of the mystery of who he is now is what kind of man leaves being superhero behind? And how do you get to that point in your life? And what comes with that is sort of, if you've seen everything, done everything, that sort of cynicism that's in him, I think that comes across. So it's a character moment to him not wear that mask.
And there's a tiny extra layer to that I found where it's like, you guys are dealing with two timelines, 2016 and then 2026 that we find at the end of the episode. So these are two completely different worlds and how they interact with superheroes, right? Whereas like in 2016, Hal's already had a full life as a superhero with like John upcoming, but in 2026, what does that world look like? This is the world of, where we see James Gunn's Superman existing and Guy Gardner's existing, right? So how does the world interact? And I guess like throughout the rest of the season, we're going to bounce back from these two different timelines and just see just how different this superhero world is and how they see these guys and how like identity plays a role in that. Another thing I want to touch on when it comes to identity, because, they're space cops, they don't need to like hide their faces. I want you to see who I am. Kelly McDonald's character, like talk to me about finding Kelly and then working with her and what does she bring to the role of Sheriff Kane?
Kelly's just effortlessly cool. She's the only person we talked to about the role.
Only one.
Yeah, and she said yes, and we were like, oh my God, Kelly just said yes.
Yeah, I think like when we were talking about some like comps for how the show would look and feel, No Country for Old Men kept coming up.
Kelly,
and Kelly is obviously in that film, but she would be in images that James Hawes was using to sort of like, say, this is what it looks and feels like, and we're like, oh, like Kelly McDonald, what do you think
cool
she's
would that
doing?
be? Yeah.
If only we could get Kelly McDonald.
Kelly as a person and Kelly as an actress both is incredibly warm and lovely, but also like, there's a layer of, she's just cool.
Yeah.
And so we wanted Carrie, the character, to have a little bit of that. And she's also like, she's a half step ahead of the guys almost through the entire time of the 2016 thing. And so we didn't want it to be, we're playing a little bit with that whole jurisdiction, like, it's the FBI, it's the feds and the locals, only this is, extraterrestrial.
Right. You got space,
and so,
we got here.
So we're playing with that trope a little bit, but mostly in that we didn't want it to be like, oh, there come the smart guys from out of town, and like, I'm from Nebraska, so like the idea being like, oh, we're gonna say how the person from Nebraska is a step behind them. Like, no. I want to go home to the state that I love. So part of it was that too, just making sure that she was like tough and cool, but like still had warmth.
Yeah, I love that she was just right there with them when John Stewart fucks up. And like he makes the perp run away. I was like, oh, you dumb fucking idiot. Yeah. Like, and that just shows that there's levels, there's experience
and he's like,
to this.
I think I just fucked up, didn't I? And she's like, I suspect
you did.
Yeah, that to me is like the best version of her. It's like, I'm not gonna yell at you, but I suspect you did.
Right, good
At least
job,
you're
buddy.
learning.
Exactly. That's the experience of it all.
One of the great things working these guys is and one of the things I've learned and just learned from them is they will not accept a cliche. But they will set up a cliche to get expectations and then undermine that. And there is that Fargo element of like, okay, the small town sheriff who's the tough. And so that's the setup. But they're like, okay, that's where we start. Now we're going to build layers because now we have the audience expectation. Now we can do this layer and this layer and this layer. And that's what Kelly brings. It's like, she twists the cliche into something new and interesting and awesome.
It was nice to meet you. Now, if you'll both kindly stay the fuck out of my way.
Let's talk about like the constructs that are made in this, specifically the dollar bill construct. We talk about expectations and like subverting those things. We see Hal Jordan, which in my opinion, I suspect a little bit of like corrupted cop. This is my comic knowledge of Parallax coming in, right? But he constructs the dollar bill and you immediately think he's going to use it for counterfeit. But then he adds in this twinkle of, oh, it lets you construct things that you need. And obviously he needs the dollar bill to like set into motion something else. Talk to me about like that scene, the anatomy of it, and like setting up this Hal Jordan that you think is going one way, but he's constantly bouncing from, is he corrupt? Oh, he's actually doing his job. Is he kind of like the good cop, bad cop? I find it very interesting.
I think that the first construct in the show is actually one that we don't see, which is that John grabs the ring as this car sort of flies off a cliff, and we later learn that he manifested bubble wrap, but we didn't see it. And I think that like one of the things that we always talked about is that in order to be Green Lantern, there's levels of sort of heroism and bravery and a lack of fear that are important. But like one of the things that we loved about the comics, especially because we're writers, is like that your imagination is one of your superpowers. And so when we were thinking about what's the first thing that Hal could manifest, the sort of idea of like, oh, he needs to get a jukebox to work, but he doesn't have any money, and he has to use his imagination here. And we wanted the audience to understand that the constructs had physicality, that you could feed them into a machine and that they would work. And obviously you can do big giant fist and bubbles and all of those other things at some point, but the idea of, oh, let's start small. What's the smallest thing that you could manifest as a dollar bill? But that's going to get you a couple of plays on a jukebox. Right. We thought it would be an interesting way because particularly when you're doing long form television, let alone a movie, once you go big, it's hard to scale back.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But also, there's so much I love about that moment, but I didn't write it. But that was Damon. But first of all, anyone knows putting that dollar in that machine, if it's like a little crease in the fold or it's like it's coming right back out. So that's that's harder than a fist, that's harder than a bubble, it's harder than bubble wrap. He had to get that perfect, man. He had to get that little spider in the corner that nobody knows about. So that it shows Hal's skill. But what I also like about it is it comes right after the action scene where Hal could have stopped that guy with his ring and didn't. Right. Where he chose not to help John and then throws that in his face being like, you gotta know when to use the ring and when not to. And then he uses it to make a dollar bill. Like in that moment, he's both throwing it in John's face and teaching him because he's like, this is actually a moment that I need this because I'm gonna get something I not from the mystery. It's not about physicality, it's about solving what's in this town. No. So there's just like character layers that are all in Damon's creation.
Even in the little bits like dollar bills. I love this. You could always find something.
And he made it 20.
He made it 20.
Oh, that's right. It's a lot of songs.
Because he put that song on a lot.
There's no little spider.
That's
Never
a good
mind.
detail. I didn't even really think about that. Yeah. It wasn't the $1 bill.
Got to put Andrew Jackson on it.
yeah. He's got to draw in.
Yeah, exactly.
He's got to draw that perfectly.
I know, right? Something that I just want to keep really, really quick because, and this is just me kind of like speculating for the rest of the season, is that, one of my favorite aspects of John Stewart is that his constructs are extraordinarily detailed because he's an architect, he's a Marine, and so his constructs are solid, like they have so much into it. And I'm hoping to see some of that as I assume this show is going to get bigger as we go on and we see more constructs and the differences between how John's constructs looks and Hal's constructs.
The architect versus the fighter.
Yeah.
The test pilot. Yeah, it was definitely something we played with a lot in the construction of those constructs.
I can't wait. Don't want you to spoil anything, but I think we got it.
And that, of course, comes right from the comic books, right from Rebirth, from Jeff Johns, but doing that thing where he described how each lantern makes a different kind of construct, and Hal does that sort of big, pilot thing, but John is precise. He's an architect. He builds it from the bottom up.
We're coming to the end of this podcast. The pilot's in the books. I believe this is a great hook for the rest of the season. I'm hooked in. But for the audiences watching at home, what could they expect coming in this season?
Well, we won't be solving Hal's murder.
We're not solving it?
Who knows who did that?
Who knows who did that?
What's interesting is nobody seems to care in the show. No,
the look is kind of like, damn, he's dead. Oh well.
Yeah, I think that obviously the story that we're most interested in is how are these two going to start to kind of figure each other out, and an understanding now that this is going to end with Hal's death. There's real stakes attached to that because it feels like there's a finite period of time in which to do it, and I think that this kind of idea of it's a buddy cop dynamic where they're not entirely buddies. It's a coaching tree dynamic where the apprentice doesn't really want to acknowledge that the coach has anything really useful to tell them. And so exploring the parameters of their relationship through this kind of high stakes mystery is sort of the energy.
Yeah, it's to the degree we talked from the jump about True Detective as an analogy. I always thought that first season of the one that the Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey one. Really, it was an emotional mystery about what happened with these two guys. The crime stuff was secondary. It was, and so that and getting into John and Hal is really, I think, the heart of the show for the next 7 episodes and understanding them better. But the good news is we do have bells and whistles, and they're,
got
you
the
know,
bells and
at
whistles.
some point Guy Gardner's out in the world, and at some point Sinestro's out there in our universe, and there's all these other things that are part of the world that like keep driving us emotionally with these two guys, basically.
I love it.
Yeah, I think it's two things. One is nerdy and one is thematic. But what really expect is just the Kyle Aaron of it all. I mean, that's the heart of this show, is the chemistry between those two actors and just them putting on making something beautiful out of what their performance is and their relationship to each other. I mean, look forward to that. That's what this show is about. And then just from the nerdy aspect, I mean, people who saw Superman in theaters and liked it, there was like a hidden mystery in the middle. Like Guy Gardner was Green Lantern.
Yeah.
And that was a mystery. Because
Like, how do we get there?
Why? How did we get there? Because at the end of this episode, Hal's dead, but also you see John's hand. He's not wearing that ring. Guy has the ring. So why does Guy end up with the ring, and where do we go after this? Because this moves us forward.
He has the best haircut. I'm just going to say it. They made it all the way through the podcast.
They just had a contest.
We should just tell them. Yeah. Best haircut gets the ring.
Thank you for that reveal.
Yeah. Someone had to say it.
That's who killed him. It was Hal cut Guy's hair, and Guy killed him. That was
Yeah.
That was the mystery.
Guy did it. Okay, we solved it. They don't need to watch the rest of this show.
He made a construct bowl.
A construct bowl, but he used real scissors.
Right,
Oh,
exactly.
He didn't go with construct scissors. Yeah,
You could have gone real bowl, construct scissors.
Yeah, no, he went the other way.
This is lore that I definitely needed.
Yeah.
So I appreciate this, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank you so
you.
much
Thank
for being
you.
on the show.
It's our pleasure.
was
Thank
great.
you.
This is great. You
Thanks
guys
for
are
having us.
Wow, that is a conversation I've wanted to have since the first time I heard that this show was even happening. Getting the three of them to actually break down how this all came together, I'm still buzzing about it. I'm not even gonna lie to you. Those guys are heavy hitters in their fields. Now, before we go, a special message from co-chairman and CEO of DC Studios, the one, the only, James Gunn.
Tom King came up with the idea for Lantern. So when Peter and I were first hired at DC, we did sort of a writer's roundtable where I came in with a bunch of ideas for, shows and movies that I wanted to do. Things like, Superman and Man of Tomorrow, but also shows like the Jimmy Olsen, Garage Show and things like that, and Creature Commandos and what was going to happen in Peacemaker and sort of a rough story. And that was when Tom King brought up this idea of creating a true detective-like version of Lanterns, where they have these outer space powers, but they're, it's a grounded, realistic show, and about the clash between John and Hal and what that would be like. And I just thought it was just such an interesting take. I think one of the strengths of Tom King is he's able to come at these iconic characters from a slightly different perspective. And I think that was our guiding light for the entire show from the beginning.
Man, thank you to James Gunn for taking the time out for us today. Like, he's clearly on set, and he still was able to do that for us. Like, hearing the origins, hearing, like, how this whole thing came together, finding the personnel, it's really cool to hear that come from the source. He clearly has a love for these properties. Huge thank you to our guests, Chris Mundy, Damon Lindelof, and Tom King. And thanks to James Gunn for sending us that message. The next episode is called Trustfall, and you can watch or listen to us break it down right here when the episode drops. Stream new episodes of DC Studios' original series Lanterns on HBO Max, and catch Lanterns, the official podcast, on HBO Max, the HBO Max YouTube channel, and wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe so you do not miss a single episode. Well, that's our show. I still can't believe I get to sit here and take apart a brand new DC Studio show with the people who actually made it. See you guys next week. In brightest day, in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power. Green Lantern's light! This was an OBB Sound production for HBO Max, hosted by me, Juju Green. Executive producers for HBO Max are Becky Rowe and Aaron Kelly. Executive producers for DC are Victor Diaz and Mike Pilata. Executive producers for OBB are Michael D. Ratner, Scott Ratner, and Toby Lawless. Producer for OBB, Toby Lawless. Production manager, Kevin Lynn. Research producer, Jesse Holland. Associate producer, Sam Harrison and Patrick Strapazon. Technical director, In-Sung Huang and David Jimenez. Editor, Sari Tiersky. Post-production supervisor, Mariana Crisostomo. Assistant editor, Mark Alcacid. Production accountant, Zachary Steinberg and Ross Hush. Director of photography, Heath Gresham. Production designer, Liz Kloklowski. Set designer, Aga Shostakovska. Lead man, Kevin Fallon. Set dresser, Robert Pound. Brian Kim, Shabazz Burwell. Zachary Taylor. Draper, Trevor Calebs. Sound mixer and editor, Josh Falcon. On-set mixer, Darren Bowling. Key hair and makeup artist, Kendall Shannon. Production assistant, Max Jordan and Henry Colombian. Production interns for OBB, Ava Grimes, Henry Kaufman, Imani Ford, and Diego Gallardo. Senior Director of Creative Development and Social Strategy for OBB, Lenore Castro. Manager of Creative Development and Social Strategy for OBB, Sharif Bakari. Special thanks to Graphics and Artwork, HBO Concept and Design Studio. DC Intern, Goldie Singer. And Lantern Battery Props, Studio Art and Technology.